What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. First, I just want to take a little trip back in time, if you will, to the 12th century. That is the first documented time that anyone had seen what we are going to build tonight in person. What we're talking about is the trebuchet. The trebuchet had moved westward from its initial invention in China and had quickly progressed from traction type trebuchets, which solely required manpower to operate the mechanism. These crews that operated these siege engines could sometimes be upwards of 100 men on these traction powered trebuchets. As time progressed, these trebuchets moved into the counterweight trebuchet design. And that knocked the crew size down from roughly 100 men for the larger engines down to about six men to operate one of these engines. The reloading time was significantly slower for the counterweight operated trebuchets as opposed to the traction trebuchet. However, it required a lot less manpower to operate. It was an incredibly genius design, and it was very, very effective, and it was used for a long time in battle. This was the preferred method of artillery. The Chinese even continued to use trebuchets long after the implementation of gunpowder. It's truly an incredible design, and it's always fascinated me. It's my favorite of all the siege engines. I just find them incredible. And tonight we're going to build a miniature version of just that. Now, first thing I need to do is start with the base. So what I'm going to do is laminate 2 sheets of this 1/4-inch plywood together, and I think that will be more than suitable for a base to build our frame on top of. So while we let that glue set up a little bit, now we'll find the center of our base. We have 20.5, so 10.25. Keeping in the spirit of having absolutely no plan whatsoever going into this, the vertical portion of the frame, I think the best course for that is just going to be to cut them the exact same length that the base is. And now I will pre-drill to hold in the upright vertical support. And now to be sure that both of my vertical supports are going to be parallel with one another, perfectly parallel, I'll use my combination square off of the vertical support that has already been fastened to the base. I have found my center. I will line these up, and then I will make a mark transferring from one to the other. So I'm going to start gluing and screwing and plumbing these vertical stabilizers. Well guys, it's starting to come together. We have our bracing installed. The only thing I didn't factor in was just how much tension was going to be on this frame. And in hindsight, the laminated 1/4 inch plywood, so I have a 1/2 inch plywood down here, but this is more like finishing plywood, and it's putting a lot of flex on it. This is something that is kind of like a prototype, really. I'd like to build something a little bit bigger that can launch like tennis balls and shit like that, so definitely a good learning process. I'm going to keep that in mind for the next one that I build, but anyways, moving forward, now we need to drill for the pivot and start talking about arm length and counterweight and sling and all that stuff. Welcome back to day 2, well, evening number 2 of working on our miniature trebuchet. As you can see, a lot of progress was made. What ended up happening last night was I just got so focused on building this thing that I forgot to hit the record button and continued to document each step as I went on and on with it. So just to bring us up to speed before we continue, we have the entire structure of the trebuchet is built. As you can see, we have the arm with a beam. We have the axle. What I did with the axle was it's just a 3/8 carriage bolt. And then I have a nut here with a washer, a nut here with a washer, just to keep the arm centered on the axle. And then it's the same thing on each side. We have nuts and washers, just keeping everything plumb. And then it's the same thing on each vertical support. Just nuts and washers sandwiching everything in, and that just prevents the axle from racking or anything like that. So this is ready for its counterweight. It's ready for its sling and pouch and the release mechanism. The release mechanism that I'm going with here is just this hook latch. You have to imagine there'll be a whole counterweight here on the back wanting to pull this up, right? So this latch will just fit through the eye hook here. There'll be a string attached, and when I pull on that string, that will fall out, and this will, in turn, do its thing. So now let's talk about the counterweight. So I know it's tough to see it through this mess of clamps, but what you're looking at is a 2" by 4.5" plywood box that's it just sat overnight while it glued. That is going to be the box that will contain the counterweight that will hang off the short end of the arm. And now we'll release the clamps and we'll start putting in some finishing nails just to make sure that it's, you know, held together really well, just to support all the weight that I'm going to put inside of it. I should have just used fucking brads, son of a bitch. You know, you try to do shit with the least amount of tools possible, and this is what ends up happening. Fuck off. Now we'll bolt these hangers to the counterweight box. Now I can't exactly tighten these bolts down all the way, right? Because then the counterweight box won't be able to swing properly. So I'm going to add a little bit of Loctite and just snug these up enough. That's pretty good. Alright, here we are up to this point. Now, these were initially the brackets that I had made to support the counterweight box and attach it to the arm. However, these were way too thick, and they did not allow me to put this bolt through. There just wasn't enough meat coming out on the other side for me to attach a washer and a nut to. So I made new ones of some thinner material. So this is where we're at up to this point. So we drop the quick release. So now we've reached the point in the build where I am completely lost with regards to the sling operation. Now, I understand how the sling works. We have a pouch. I don't know if you can also see while I have you, I made this track in the middle here for the pouch to sit in and help guide, you know, whatever material is in the pouch up and out once it's completed. So back to my understanding of the sling and the pouch. The pouch sits in here, the sling runs up to the arm. One portion of the sling is affixed to the arm, it doesn't come off. The other piece of the sling is attached to a point on the arm where once it reaches a certain spot in its rotation, that will fall off and allow the pouch to open up and whatever is inside of the pouch to be flung. Now, I know that these arms reach a certain stall point and some stuff like that, so I'm not really sure how to set this up so that I can be positive that this pouch is going to open up when I want it to. I think it's just going to be a lot of trial and error. The one thing that I'm pretty confident about is that I want my sling ropes to be the length of the end of the bar to the axle. So I want my pouch to sit underneath the axle. Now, when I was deciding what to make the pouch out of, I was kind of at a loss, really. Initially, I thought I was going to make it out of like a piece of canvas from a drop cloth that I have, and I just didn't like that. I wanted something that was a little more permanent, something that I could make that looked a little more presentable. So this is one of the only things that I went and bought for this project, was this iron-on patch from Walmart. It's like a denim material type of thing. So the rough denim will face out, and then this smoother portion in here, it's an iron-on patch. So this smoother portion in here will be what actually grabs the material that's inside of it, and I think that's going to help release it from the pouch. Well, guys, welcome to evening number 3 of our trebuchet build. First, I have to apologize. My intention when I first started building this thing was to document every single step of the way with it, and that just did not end up happening. I'm sure some of you can understand that you get going on a project, and before you know it, you're just sort of hyper-focused on what you're doing, and you just start running through the list of things that need to get done. And that's exactly what happened with this. I really dropped the ball on filming a lot of the construction of it, and for that I do apologize, but let's bring you guys up to speed on where we are now. So the machine has been tested. It's functional. It works really well, actually, as you'll see right now. So it works, and it works pretty well. I'm happy with it. Now, to talk about some things that didn't really occur to me when I initially started this project. I'll say this again, I had absolutely no plans, nothing drawn up, and really no idea of what I was doing. I'm pretty convinced that I've put entirely too much weight into this thing. I don't think I need that much weight in it. So I'm going to take all the weight out of it, and then I'm going to slowly start adding it back in until I get the desired result from the machine, and then I'll leave it alone. I don't want to put any more added stress onto these components than I need to. This is 1/4-inch plywood, and you have this massive amount of weight suspended here, all of this potential energy, and instantaneously all of this very aggressive, very violent kinetic energy is released, and it's a lot of stress on the machine itself. So if I can alleviate that, I definitely will. My biggest fear is that this counterweight is going to drop, and these bolts are going to shear right up and through the sides of the box. My formula for the arm was kind of something that I came up with in my head, so I don't know if it's necessarily the right formula. I will say I've had so much fun building this thing, and it's been such a challenge, and I've really enjoyed doing that I think this is going to be sort of my prototype, and I do want to build one that's just a little bit larger that can launch those skee balls. I don't know if you remember in the arcades, you play that skee ball game when you roll the ball up the ramp. Those are pretty heavy, I'm sure, as you guys know, so I'd like to build a bigger machine that's capable of launching those. And I think this has been a great learning process and a great thing to test some theories on as I build that bigger machine. My formula for the arm, this arm is 30 inches from top to bottom. So I have 1/3 of the arm back on the counterweight side of the axle, 2/3 out for the sling side. So we have 10 inches here, obviously 20 there. I'm not sure if that's the right formula for it. Am I diminishing this machine's capability by having entirely too much arm on the back? I don't know. Now what I did do is add some plastic bushings. So the holes in these uprights that accept the axle are substantially larger than the actual axle because it had to accept these plastic bushings. And then in the top, I have a very short screw that comes down through the top of the support, pushes into the plastic, actually goes through the plastic, and wedges itself into the axle to prevent this axle from being able to turn. So now that we've talked about the counterweight, we've talked about my formula for determining how much of the arm I want to hang over on the counterweight side as opposed to on the sling side. We've talked about the axle and how that's been fastened to these upright supports. Now let's talk about the pin release, sling, pouch, and trigger system. And so you'll see here we have this release pin. It's on the very tip of the arm. And what this is for is to hold one end of the sling line. During this rotation of the arm, there will come a point, usually around optimally, around 45 degrees from the axle, this will slip off, allowing this pouch to open up and let go of whatever it is that you're trying to launch. As you can see, we have the static line that never leaves the arm, is attached the whole time. And then I used these little eye hook things here for the trigger system, and it's worked pretty well, and I'll show you that now. Well, that's unfortunate. Well, now that I've cleaned up that mess of counterweight, luckily the box wasn't damaged, it just happened to swing forward and throw a bunch of the weights out of it, which are just washers and old sockets and stuff like that. So now that my initial testing is done, I know that the machine works how I want it to. I'm happy with the trigger system, I'm happy with my counterweight system, I'm happy with my sling design, I'm happy with my pouch design. Now it's time to disassemble the entire machine, sand everything down. My plan is to stain all the wooden components a nice dark walnut and paint all of these metal components a flat black, just to give it kind of a more utilitarian look to it. Right now it just looks like a science project. I kind of want to bring some tastefulness to this project, and because it's something that I'll have and I want to continue to use. Also, I got a square of leather, very thin leather, and that's going to be used to make a new pouch. This denim patch is fine. It's just a little bit rigid. So this is very malleable. It's very soft, and I think it will also help add to the overall look of the machine. So let's get to disassembling this thing and sanding, and yeah, we'll move on from there. So the entire machine is now disassembled. One thing I'm checking for are stress cracks or fractures in the wood. I'm not seeing anything. These are the brackets that hold the counterweight onto the arm. I'm not seeing any splitting or anything like that in the wood, which is good. And also the same deal with the counterweight box itself. I'm not seeing any splitting or any tearing in this. Now, one good thing, and this is kind of, it's plywood, right? But the grain of the wood is actually running horizontal, and the force is vertical. So it would have to flex and break the grain rather than just being able to tear straight up through it. I think that's helping a little bit. But either way, I am going to put some backing on the inside of the box, just as preventative, to stop the bolt from being able to tear straight up and through this thin plywood. So before we get underway with sanding, one thing I also want to do to this track is, rather than having these squared off edges, I do want to, I'm not sure if I can fit a router in here. I will try. I just don't know if I have enough space in here for the plate of the router, the base, but I'll try. If not, I'll just hand file and sand. I want to bring these to more of a V shape, this track. I don't necessarily want this squared off edge. I've had no issues with the pouch hanging up on these edges. However, I want to give the machine every chance it has for just a smooth operation. So I think shaving these down to more of a V shape is the best way to do it. So It looks like the router will fit in here to take some material off these. However, I just want to go through and sink these small finish nails. I noticed that some of the heads are raised up ever so slightly above the material, and the last thing I want is the base of the router to get hung up on that and have it take a nice gouge out of the material. So I'll just make sure those are sunk down nicely. Alright, here we go. Now usually I cannot stand the noise of routers. It's just one of my things, but this DeWalt XR cordless trim router has been great. It's relatively quiet, all things considered. It's not overly loud or anything like that. So now let's have a look, because the last thing I want to do, you know something, I don't know. Nope. I think that's just a little too shallow, unfortunately. Yeah, that's a shame. That really, I mean, I can drop it a little bit. Yeah, right about, that's it though. That's the maximum amount of depth I'm gonna get. See, what's happening is the router bit is just bottoming out up against the base itself. Something I should have thought of ahead of time, but in any case, I'll use the router to take off what I can, and we'll see how that looks, and then we'll go from there. That's literally taking off nothing. Yeah, that's a shame. Whatever. Let's keep going. So it really didn't do much of anything at all. I mean, yeah, I don't really think there's any other way than to just do this by hand. So let's get cracking on that. Now, because this is made out of a lot of scrap, it looks like this piece has a really generous layer of wood glue on it, so this is going to be fun to scrape off of there. Really, now all I'm trying to do is just clean up any wood glue that's still stuck to this thing. Some things I can abide with, but wood glue isn't one of them. So now comes the really tedious part, which is pre-stain conditioning all the wood, cleaning up all the metal parts, making sure there's no oils or anything like that all over them, staining, painting the metal parts black, and waiting for them to dry. So not a whole lot of fun. Alright, we've cleaned up now, and our next step is going to be to cut the new pouch. So since I'm not going to untie this thing quite yet, I'm just going to trace this pattern this way and then hold it in its position and flip it over and trace the top side that way. One thing I want to ensure is that because the new ball that I have decided to use, these new wooden balls, are bigger than the previous one, I just want to make sure that this pouch size is actually going to be conducive to what I'm trying to do. And it looks like it will be. Well, here it is, guys. It's completed. It's been reassembled, and through the magic of video editing, you didn't have to be subjected to the disassembly and the sanding of each individual part, and the pre-stain conditioning and the staining and the painting and the drying and the reassembly and all that, I just thought it was kind of a waste of time to film monotonous stages of like that. I really didn't see a point in having people watch that. So here it is. It's been reassembled. It's been tested. It's functioning as intended. And I did have to kind of fine-tune a couple things once I reassembled it, like any machine. You test it, you disassemble it, and then when you reassemble the thing, oftentimes it's not going to work exactly as it did prior to disassembly. And that was my experience with this. There were a few things that had to be fine-tuned with it to get it to perform as it did prior to staining and all of that. But with a little bit of patience, it's back to top performance. I'm definitely happy with the way that this turned out. I did have some ideas of things that I wanted to do to it, such as adding wheels to it. I don't think it's necessary to add wheels to it. I feel like it's just kind of like a waste of time, really. I can pick this thing up with my hand and move it wherever I need to. It doesn't need to be on wheels. This isn't a scale model by any means. It's a scaled down version of the real thing, but none of this is built to scale, so why I felt the need to add wheels and stuff to it to add more realism is beyond me. I just think that's kind of an unnecessary step. I also wanted to add a ratcheting winch system to pull the arm down. I'm not going to do that either. I've devoted entirely too much time to this project at this point, so it's time to just put a pin in it and call it done. So that's what I'm going to do. I've definitely learned a lot through this process. I really have. Just figuring out the small idiosyncrasies of this machine, such as, the release pin and getting the angle of that right, because when I first did the initial testing of this, I had 2 fixed sling lines to the arm, and it didn't occur to me until after like the 4th or 5th deployment of the arm as to why the projectile wasn't being released from the pouch. And so once that kind of clicked, and I was able to understand that part of the sling needs to open up, then I came up with the release pin and just getting that angle right. That was just trial and error, really. I have no background in physics whatsoever. I mean, I took it as general education in public school system, but other than that, and that was some time ago, more time than I would care to admit, actually. So this was really just a whole lot of trial and error for me, but it works great. I absolutely love it. It was a blast to do. It's so much fun to use. You really can't help but kind of chuckle and laugh when you set this thing off, because it's so much fun. In hindsight, one thing that I would have done differently, and this is honestly, it's probably the only thing that I would have done differently, because I'm very happy with the way that it performs, is I would have made this counterweight section a little bit shorter. I divided the overall arm length into thirds, so it's overall is 30 inches, so we have 10 inches of counterweight arm. I'm not sure if that's the correct term for it or not, but that's what I'm calling it. This section here, it's entirely too long. I don't think that it needs to be that long, and I think by having it that length, it's actually less efficient and caused me to have to add more weight in order to get it to perform. So for the next one that I build, this will definitely be shortened. I think I'll split the overall arm length into quarters rather than thirds, and I think that should get us a little bit more of a preferred action out of the machine. But like I said, even though I've had to add more weight than I would have liked to the counterweight, the thing performs great, and it hurls this 1-inch diameter ball probably 60 feet, I would say, consistently, between 50 and 60 feet. So it's pretty cool. I was impressed the first time that I had a successful launch of this. I was really surprised, happily, but surprised nonetheless. So the way that I figured out my trigger system is just this eye hook here. So I'll just gently kind of release that so you can see, and they just slip into one another there. As far as the release pin goes, it's just a washer on a nail that I cut the head off of and kind of filed down so it's a little bit smoother, and that simply just slips over that like so. I learned, obviously that the sling needs to be, have some tension on it prior to release, so just making sure that everything is basically under tension. The arm's under load, the sling has some tension to it, and you just have all this potential energy just waiting to be unleashed on this, so just making sure that everything is as it should. Moving on to our axle portion, I chose to use an 8-inch 3/8 bolt. You'll notice this pack of washers here. That's simply just because 2 inches of this bolt is not threaded. So in order for me to cinch up both sides of this together nice and tight, I had to use a pack of washers and then this bolt, and that enables me to do that. Inside the upright support are plastic bushings, just to help distribute some of that energy a little more evenly when this machine comes to life. So to wrap this up, guys, because I feel that we've kind of gone on entirely too long about the trebuchet, it was a blast to build this thing. It really was. Even at points where I was getting a little bit frustrated with it, I had to walk away from it. It was so much fun to build, really, and it's even more fun to use, truly. I recommend anybody taking on this project, and if it seems overwhelming, it really isn't. Like, I had no idea what I was doing, not a clue. I knew how it looked, and that was the extent of my knowledge when it came to one of these siege engines. I had really no idea what went into its actual operation. I just knew how it was supposed to look, and I ran with that. And it was a lot of trial and error. It was just so much patience and fine-tuning things and just sitting and staring at it and trying to figure out what the hell I'm doing wrong. But it paid off, because now when I pull that pin, this thing does exactly what I want it to do. And that's one of the most rewarding things about building, right? We take a pile of nothing and we turn it into something. And so after doing that with this project, it really has kind of put a bug in me, this siege engine bug, which makes me want to build a torsion catapult for our next project. So that's what I'm going to do. Now with the torsion catapult, I'm going to go into it just like this with absolutely no plan. I know what a torsion catapult looks like, and I know what it's supposed to do, and that is it. That is my limited, very, very, very limited knowledge of a torsion catapult. I know there are so many different types of catapults depending on what part of the world it came from. They had so many different mechanisms for making those things function, but the torsion catapult seems to be the one that is most fascinating to me. I have a very vague idea about some ropes being twisted and kept under tension as you move the arm back. We're going to figure that out as we go along. So that's going to be fun. I am looking forward to that, and once I get this video edited and uploaded, that project will start right after that. So as always, guys, I really, really do appreciate you watching. I know there's a million other videos that you could have chose to click on, but you clicked on this one, and it means a lot to me, so thank you. So I'm going to end this video now with some footage of this thing in action. I hope you guys enjoy it. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you later. Let's see what it does with the socket. I mean, I don't really recommend launching shit like this inside of a small shed, but it's pitch black out and freezing, so I'm going to take my chances. Holy